7 points from 9, 2 wins from 3. It's hard to temper the growing optimism that is surrounding this Norwich City team at the moment. Welcome back to the latest edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast in association with Future Radio, recording just a few hours after Norwich City's 3-1 victory over Millwall at Carrow Road. And what a performance it was as well. I'm your host, Connor Southwell, joined by Seaman and Paddy Davitt to reflect on everything that we saw in NR1 this afternoon. We've also made some additions to our backdrop, which we will come to. But Paddy, first and foremost, just give us a reflection of that performance, because we spent last season talking about performances and maybe how they weren't a lot of the time where they needed to be. It is, as I said, a growing optimism, a growing sense that, you speak to people at the moment and they will tell you, there's a feeling, there's a good feeling around this. And that comes from results, admittedly, but there's also substance behind those results at the moment. The performances are causing a great deal of excitement at the moment. And can you see why off the base of today and what we've seen so far this season?
Absolutely, yeah. And obviously, I don't want to lapse into manager speak, but there's only 3 games and let's keep our feet on the ground. Why wouldn't you want to get carried away? Because the unending cycle of misery that was the last 11, 12 games of last season, you want something. If you're a Norwich fan, you want to, if you're going to Carrow Road, you want to go there, feel optimistic, feel entertained, come away feeling good about your football team. And 3 games in the league, plus the Carabao Cup win at the death at QPR in midweek. And I think David Wagner said it best this afternoon post-match, where he said, listen, and he talked about it publicly, he had a feeling that in pre-season things were coming together. He talked, I think, today about things gelling, the new signings coming in and adding what they hoped they would add to the group in terms of the mentality primarily, but also quality and experience. But that's pre-season, and we've all seen pre-seasons where results, if you want to measure them by results, have gone well, and then you get into the season and it's a different story entirely. But there has been a continuation in terms of what we saw in pre-season, both results-wise, performance-wise, and just a feeling of a shift, in the outlook, and that you've got a group of players now who, because even in these 4 games, they've had adversity, they've had to come from behind, they've not had it all their own way, but they find a way. And then if you overlay onto those type of qualities, those character traits, the quality they do have in the ranks. I mean, Zara again today, he's the conductor of the orchestra, really. Such a quality player, far too good for the Championship, but that's a different matter entirely. But then you've got the potency now that we're starting to see with Sargent, with Barnes chipping in today with a goal, with Johnny Rowe again. All the elements that you need in terms of quality, married with a character in the group and a feeling that if there is adversity, and of course there will be in the Championship, there always is in the Championship, this group can withstand that and come out the other side and keep moving forward. So yeah, very intoxicating feeling around this team at the minute. That, and 3 games in, you look down at the league table, and I know you probably shouldn't even look at the league table, but 3rd in the table, 7 from 9, should have been 9 from 9, given how the Southampton game ended and that penalty twist went against them. They really couldn't have done much more, I don't think, to signal that there has been a turning of the corner with last season and how that ended. And as we go now into, the real part of this season, that they've set themselves up to have a really good season. What that looks like, still too early to say, in terms of where you benchmark what's possible, what's attainable. But I think irrefutably, even now, 3 or 4 games in, they won't be finishing 13th. This group of players, unless they get some horrendous injury periods, and dare I say it, the transfer window comes into play in a negative sense, and we'll get into that probably more in due course. This group of players are not finishing 13th, and so anything above that is optimistic and feels like something to be excited about, because there was precious little of that, obviously, in the last 11 games or so of last season.
Yeah, and Sam, I mean, today it was so vibrant at Carrow Road. There was such good energy about the place, and that's on pitch and off pitch as well. And Paddy's right to mention it. You reference a lot of the games that were, by the way, 3 or 4 league games ago, when it was so toxic and nasty, and there was such a I hate using the word disconnect because it was overused last year, but there was a I'm going to use it because I'm going to have to use disconnects. I can't think of anything more appropriate. But there was a separation between the fans and their demands and expectations to what was being produced on the pitch. I mean, it just feels, and again, I go back to that feeling element, and there's a lot of substance that we'll dig into, but purely the feeling feels like it shifted so much in such a short period of time.
It feels absolutely ridiculous, to be honest, that the Blackpool game was 3 home league games ago. And I think the almost revolution over the summer that David Wagner's been able to undertake with this team, they've made 6 signings. 1 was a backup goalkeeper. 5 of them have been for free, and he's had a pre-season. And with that, the difference between the Blackpool game and what we saw today is a completely unrecognisable team. So, to be fair to Wagner, I think he deserves his dues. And there was a lot of questions asked of him at the end of last season, and a lot of blame sort of pointed in his direction, probably rightfully, after 1 win in 11 games to end that season. But you can't really ask much more of a coach than to be able to take a team that were where they were at the end of last season and put them where they are now. And, it probably is worth saying that Dean Smith's side started quite well, at least results-wise. But what feels different, as you said, is that atmosphere, that feeling around Carrow Road. And it all, I think, comes from the performance and the fact that it's easy to watch this team and believe that they're going to be able to reproduce this over a season. I think you can watch football teams, and Dean Smith's Norwich side were included in this, where they'll get good results, but you don't have any faith that this is a replicable or sustainable system. Whereas you watch this Norwich team and they're not just winning games by slivers, and I know there's been a lot of late goals involved, but it's not just luck and grinding out results. They're winning the games that they deserve to win, and I think they've probably had a decent claim at deserving to win all of the games they've played so far this season. So I think it is proof for that whole sort of believe the process sort of idealism, and the fact that it's not all just about results. And I was a little bit worried coming into this season with the transfers that they made, that they were almost going to go too far that way. When you look at a club that signs Shane Duffy, Ashley Barnes, talks about experience as much as they did sort of the back end of last season, and then when they sign these players, and you do worry that there's not going to be much tactical philosophy behind it, and they are going to just rely on sort of leadership and being clever to win you games, and that isn't going to win you games alone. I think Wagner spoke about in his press conference before the game the fact that the leaders have come in and have improved the atmosphere in the dressing room, but that would be useless if they were, I don't want to use the same word that he used, but if they were playing poorly, then that would be pretty useless. And I think you can see from this team that he's not resting on his laurels and thinking that the championship experience he's got in the squad is going to get him over the line. He's still clearly very involved in a lot of information for the players and a lot of tactical nuance, because this is a team now that has a philosophy and has an identity, and that we know is going to perform in a certain way when we go to Carrow Road. And I think the fans have seen that as well, and that's why they feel so positive at the moment. And it feels like it will be able to withstand tests as well. It doesn't feel like it's all going to fall apart if they lose 1-0 at Huddersfield or whatever, because at some point, I don't think any of us think Norwich are going to go unbeaten this season, and at some point they will face a test. And I think we saw in the whole game when they went 1-0 down, and continually throughout the season so far, that the fans probably will go with them when things start to turn bad. And although it won't be tolerated over a long period of time, I think this is an atmosphere that now, as opposed to the incredibly fragile feeling there was at Carrow Road a lot of the time last season, even when things were going well, I think now there's hopefully a long-term positive mood that you can feel within Carrow Road, and it is just a really nice place to be, probably for the first time in 3 or 4 years, and the volume has turned up a notch for the first time in that period of time. So yes, it's a good place to be. You could definitely feel it today, and I'm sure the players are benefiting from that as well.
It's even like on the smaller end of the scale in terms of Carrow Road. I could probably count on one hand the amount of new chants that I heard for players throughout the entirety of last season. We've probably had 5 or 6 already. I think that's usually not maybe an indicator of any value, but certainly to kind of gauge the feeling around how supporters are feeling about the team at the moment, and it's definitely positive. And we're seeing that obviously with the waves that they're participating in at the end. I think it's nice that that's as a collective. It's not just David Wagner leading that or a player leading that. It's quite nice that you've got that collective front to it. Should we address the Darren Eadie in the room and various things? I mean, we did make a call out. This won't really work if you're on audio, so I'll do my best to describe. But we put a call out towards the end of the last podcast for Norwich City memorabilia that perhaps people wouldn't mind us using for a little bit of a backdrop, because I mean, as you can kind of see, we've still got relative, what do you call these, like just boards, aren't they? But I don't know, promotional boards of there's a nice one on Norfolk geography and on the history of the Eastern Daily Press and all that stuff. We wanted to give it a bit more of a Norwich City flavour. I mean, we've managed to find one of if you've ever been to, I don't know, a fun fair or like a place for kids, you know, those type of boards that you put your heads through and take pictures of. We've managed to find one of those with PinkUn branding on it from a couple of years ago, I think. It's Tamers and Adam Eadie, but they've got no faces, and obviously maybe we'll get a couple of guys to stick their faces through that at various points this season. And then more pertinently to my left, as I look, and I have to thank our listener Katie for very kindly donating this life-size, I'm told, cardboard cutout, and it's not cardboard either, it's like really thick wood of Darren Eadie modelling the 1997 to 99 Norwich City home kit, which is the one with the controversial yellow shorts. You might remember, I think it was Mylene Class, wasn't it? She was involved in the unveiling of that at Gerald's, I want to say, but maybe it wasn't Gerald's. I'm sure someone will correct me. But this is Darren Eadie, late 90s, looking resplendent. I'm actually told this is one that they used in the club shop to promote the kit at the time. And I think Katie or Katie's family won it or auctioned it or something. He is now going to be part of our podcast. So I'm sure Darren Eadie will be absolutely delighted at that. He's been living in my house for the last week and absolutely terrifying everyone in it. Whenever I walked into my living room, my dog's had a little nibble of his shorts. But yeah, now he is here. So if you've got any more useless Norwich City memorabilia, maybe it's taking up some room in your house or you just want rid of it, then do get in contact. We will take it and we can add it to this background. I think I've got a Van Wolfswinkel 9 shirt somewhere that's going to go up at some stage. So that's the kind of thing that we're after. Obviously, if it's very valuable and very meaningful, don't give it to us is the way to do it. So there we go. Paddy, you liking Darren Eadie lurking over your shoulder?
Well, Darren Eadie, the real Darren Eadie, he's an absolute legend. So, if I was going to be anywhere in the vicinity of a sofa with a Norwich personality, he'd be pretty near the top of the list, mate, yeah.
There you go, high praise. Maybe we can get like a full 11 going of cardboard cutouts. I don't know if anyone else owns a Norwich City cardboard cutout, but yes, thank you very much to Katie and her very kind granddad who I picked that up off a couple of weeks ago. We appreciate it. So that's the Darren Eadie in the room addressed. Let's talk about a bit more about this Norwich team then, because as much as we talk about the feeling, as I mentioned, there is substance behind it. And what we saw today against the Millwall side, who just lost out with the top 6 on the final day of last season, David Wagner said pre-match he felt they would be a top 10 team, irrespective maybe of their fans' views of both Gary Rowett and the style of football they're employing. This was a major test, and you look at that 90-minute spell, Paddy, and Norwich looked more physical, quicker, hungrier, and probably possessing in more quality, both individually but more pertinently as a collective throughout it. And that maybe typifies what we're seeing with Norwich at the moment. I'm probably limiting this to the starting 11, and the debate we'll have later on will maybe explain why that is the case. But as a collective, the way they're functioning at the moment is so slick and so effective. David Wagner mentioned the counter-pressing post-match, but what occurred to me is it's so adaptable. You look at last week, Southampton, they had to play in transition. They could play in transition. Today, they were faced with a low block. They said, fine, we'll use the space in the wide areas. We'll create overlaps. We'll use decoy runs. We'll counter press really well. And we'll break you down over 90 minutes because we believe we've got quality in attacking areas. Ashley Barnes after the game said, at the moment, it feels, or he believes, that every time they step out on the pitch, that they're capable of winning. That kind of encapsulates it, doesn't it? It's a really multifaceted side that they've got, a really fluid, adaptable side to situation and opponent at the moment. Yeah,
which is a testament for me to Wagner, Pelach now coming in, his influence in the coaching team, but the coaching staff generally. That they've, again, as Sam pointed out, over the space really of only a pre-season, tactically, technically, the work that they've put into these players before you even get into the fitness element and the double and triple sessions, and boy, is that paying off again, in terms of look at the last 10, 15 minutes of all of these games. Maybe not as marked today as Hull or QPR, but nevertheless, the fitness element, the tactical, the technical element, and then they've obviously recruitment-wise, there's no doubt as it stands, Jack Stacey looks an excellent addition. Duffy, Barnes, and Fisher may go on to prove an excellent signing as well when he comes through properly. But it is worth noting. Yes, they've won the game comfortably today, but Johnny Rowe's goal 25 minutes in, the first 20 minutes, Millwall looked very, very competitive, and Norwich were not having it all their own way. If anything, you were a little bit concerned that would they struggle to break them down, and those questions that they were being posed, they didn't really feel, to me, watching that first 20 minutes, that they necessarily had the answers. But in terms of slipping gears, that's what this group can do. And the majestic team goal capped by Johnny Rowe's unbelievable finish. Now I've seen it back on the telly. The way, not only does he cut inside, but in one motion, it's like he just puts his foot through it as if it's just his next stride pattern. Real high tariff manoeuvre, and that underlines the soaring confidence that lad is feeling at the minute in a Norwich shirt on a pitch. But they didn't have it all around, and that, in a roundabout way, is even more impressive. That it wasn't a flat track bully type of from minute one. Millwall withdrew into themselves at Carrow Road and were not able to really offer any threat. That's how it ended up, albeit they had a little flurry at the end and they got a consolation goal. But, the first 25 minutes were hard going. Norwich had to really think about it, deconstruct it, and then when they did, that period from Johnny Rowe's goal to Ashley Barnes' goal, round about the hour mark, they were scintillating, scoring goals, looking like they could score at will. And I guess that all hints to the work that's gone on since the end of last season, both in terms of the transfer window, in terms of the pre-season, and what was key to Wagner and his coaching staff, the philosophical almost work that he was trying to get these players to take on board without the pressure of having to sort of relentlessly try and pick up results in the Championship and scrapping for points to try and revive a fading playoff hopes. Freed from that headspace, they've clearly been able to put in the structural work they needed. And again, we're going to get a bit sick and tired of saying it. It's so early days that, the Championship could easily come back to 6 weeks from now, and we're talking about, well, it's got a bit harder and Norwich need to pick up the pace again because they're losing track or they're losing touch with the clubs at the top of the table. So, everything we're discussing at the moment, for me, we have to filter it through. It's such a small sample.
You mean you can't win the league after 3 games?
Not unless you're Real Madrid. No, apparently. / Ipswich Town. But, experience tells you, let's see where we are in a month's time, in 2 months' time. But there is compelling evidence growing now. And again, just to bring it right back to today, in that first 20, 25 minutes where they didn't have it their own way, they were able to come through that and then go on to prove that, as the final scoreline did underline, that they were so much better than Millwall in every facet, both with and without the ball. And that's not to be dismissed, despite clearly there's a groundswell amongst Millwall fans who are not having Gary Rowett anymore, and they made it very clear they're not having him anymore. But this is a team or a squad or a club who, in not all that many games previous, were taking the playoff battle to the final game of last season, having finished top 10 again for 2 consecutive seasons. They are, in Championship terms, a very good benchmark, I think, whatever their ongoing struggles at the moment, it would feel. And for Norwich to be so much better than them, again, you leave that thinking, OK, yep, Wagner is onto something here, and you just hope now that with a fair wind, they can develop some very positive trends, and then we'll see where that takes them.
Yeah, and last season I remember there'd be teams that came to Carrow Road and you think, they're not to be disrespectful, but maybe you wouldn't, I'm trying to word this correctly, but you wouldn't look at them as maybe a team that were challenging for the top 6 or the top 2, and they would come and they'd look pretty ordinary, but they'd leave with a point, sometimes even 3 points. And now we're talking about Norwich City beating them, as you say, very early days, and it's been an impressive opening chapter imperfect as well, and we'll come on to some of the imperfections that we've seen. But Sam, I mean, you mentioned the recruitment strategy. It's really interesting because there has been a big focus on mentality and experience. You've heard it from David Wagner, from Stuart Webber, even from maybe within the camp amongst some of the players, and a lot of fans and probably us guys as well. Initial reaction to Ashley Barnes, when Ashley Barnes' name got mentioned for the first time, I remember me and Paddy looking at each other and puffing our cheeks out, and Shane Duffy probably likewise for a lot of people. But what you're seeing is, yes, they're injecting what you need in terms of mentality, but actually those players have real quality, and it's not a surprise because both have played a lot of the last 5 or 6 years of their career in the Premier League and in good teams in the Premier League. Shane Duffy in a Brighton side that has obviously progressed year on year. Burnley, who had a really prolonged spell in the Premier League, and Ashley Barnes was at the heart of that. So it's not a surprise that these players are doing as well as they are. But I think it's important that for all of the talk will be on the intangibles that they've added, they've also added real quality. And I mean, Paddy mentioned the Rowe goal, and this maybe leans into the adaptable point, but this is a Norwich team capable of scoring different goals as well. The first goal, which was real quality in terms of combination play, then they go and score a set piece, and then they go and score not indirectly from a cross. You've got players like Ashley Barnes, who I mentioned, who can take the ball in and play it to John Rowe, but equally he's happy to back into someone and win a free kick. He's happy to leave a flailing elbow if a flailing elbow needs to be there. So he can do that side, but I also think maybe there's not a disservice, but I think it's easy to overlook the quality that those two players in particular have brought to this Norwich side.
Yeah, I agree with you. I remember speaking to Elliot Bennett when both of those players were signed, and he's played with both of them. And I asked him about Barnes, and he said, yeah, everyone's talking about the experience and the physicality and his sort of what he's known for, basically, his reputation. But technically, he's really, really good. I remember interviewing him and half thinking, yeah, but nobody's going to say that their former teammate is pretty poor technically. But it turns out he was absolutely spot on. And I think Barnes' technical ability is something that really gets lost amongst the cliches of, as we've spoken about, experience and know-how and, all these words that are used to describe players like Barnes, and I think you can understand it. He spent 10 years at Burnley. He's 33. He's probably at the stage of his career where you do need to start using those a little bit more than maybe you might have used pace or the technical ability previously. But I think in the absence of a traditional sort of number 10, they haven't got that Buendia or that Houlihan Maddison to find the way through. I think Barnes has actually really stepped up as a sort of creative player, and when Norwich signed him, I certainly wasn't ever expecting to utter that sentence, but with Sargent seemingly the goal scorer of the two, I think he probably suits that slightly further forward role a bit more than Barnes. I think he's been really good at dropping in, creating space for Sargent in behind him and linking the play really well. So often you see him take the ball in and find Stacey out wide. That's such a common thing for this Norwich side, and I think he has been really key in the way that they get the ball forward, because you can have somebody up there who wins headers and who battles or whatever, but in order to get the ball into those areas and keep it there, you need somebody whose first touch is really good, and Sargent isn't that person. So as much as he did impress at times last season in a number 9 role, I think he looks even better as part of a front two, and Barnes has really helped him in that role. And then to look at Duffy, I think it has shown the fact that he didn't play a lot of games for probably the last 2 years. I think it took him a few to really get up to the speed of things and to get into a rhythm. He obviously made mistakes in the first 2 or 3 games that he played for Norwich in a competitive scenario, but I've actually been really impressed with him the last 2 games. I thought against QPR especially he was really good and helped out Andrew Bamadele when he was really, really struggling. And then today I think it was a shame that he got out-jumped before that Millwall goal, because up until then he'd had a near-perfect performance. Him and Gibson structurally were really, really good. And then there was one time in the first half, I think the ball fell to Nisbet, and that should have been 1-1 really, but both of them made excellent blocks to deny him. And I think that quality is something that Norwich really lacked and that Duffy has brought, because so often now Norwich will concede a corner. They conceded a corner at 3-1 with about 5 minutes left today, and it could have been a real high pressure situation, but it comes in, Duffy just clears it, and we're so used to seeing that now. How often does he get his head to set pieces for opposition and also for Norwich? And maybe he needs to improve his finishing a little bit, but in both boxes he's certainly added something that Norwich needed. It's not only about the experience and the know-how and the intangibles, but physically that's been something that Stuart Webber's been near on obsessed with for a number of years. And I think although they've made a few attempts at trying to address that, it probably took all the way up until Gabriel Sara for them to actually find the sort of players that were adding that. And you look at this Norwich side now, led by the likes of Duffy and Barnes, and physically they look really, really strong and really good. So I think they've added that aspect without losing the technical ability. In fact, they probably look like a technically better side than they did last season, despite the fact that they've now lost Cantwell and Dowell and Pookie, all the players that this time a year ago you would have been highlighting as the players that provide that sort of thing. So you've got to give credit to Wagner for putting it all together, because it is quite a strange mix, to be honest. This 11 on paper probably shouldn't be producing the sort of football that it is, but he's found a way of doing that, of getting the best out of players who are, Duffy's age and Barnes' age, and they've achieved enough that they could have come to Norwich and rested on their laurels and played the way that they always have. But he's clearly found a way to get the best out of them in their current scenario. So I think a lot of credit has to go to him, but also to them for bringing the quality. And it's easy to look at big names a lot of the time, and I think in the sort of Farker era we got used to maybe even looking down on clubs who bring in these players with reputation, because Norwich were able to pick players that we'd never heard of out of the German second division. It felt like you didn't need to do that, but I think this has been a reminder that some players do have big reputations and big names for a reason, and they have brought some real quality. So yeah, I think overall Duffy and Barnes especially, but then you look at Stacey and the rest of the transfer business they've done. And credit to Stuart Webber, it's the first really good transfer window, I think, based on the early evidence. It's the first really good transfer window they've had in a long while. And they've brought a lot, not just experience and nous and intangibles to the dressing room. On the pitch, they've really brought a lot.
Yeah, for all the chest beating and whatnot, there's been real substance behind their performances, which has been good to see. And I guess finally for the first part of the pod, Pad, I wanted to speak about the attacking element. But Barnes scored his 100th league goal in 500 league appearances today, which was nice for him, which I put to him after the game, and it's kind of a year, it was all right, wasn't it? Sort of a bit like that, in a much better accent than me. So you've got that element, and I spoke earlier about how the team are adaptable, but actually you've got a real varied attack at the moment, because you've got two strikers who are pretty capable, if a ball's put in the box and it's hung in the air, they'll go and head it, and so will John Rowe, apparently. Who knew? But also they've got the excitement of John Rowe and what he adds from a technical element. You've got Christian Fashnacht, who I think will score goals and has been quite quietly impressive, actually, I think, in the last couple of games. Then you've got Gabby Sara and his brilliance in behind. There are lots of strands to that attack, but also different ways of scoring goals. And I mentioned earlier the different type of goals that they scored today. It's not like it was under Daniel Farker, and maybe it's comparable to what they did under Paul Lambert, and there's probably loads of eras before that as well. And I'm not comparing the teams, but I'm comparing more the variation of their attacking flavour. If you ask now how are Norwich City going to score a goal, well, they can score a goal for a set piece, they can score a goal from a cross, they can score a goal by carving a team open, as they did for the first goal. They can score a goal in transition. All of this is really healthy, particularly, as he said, to kind of wrap this debate nicely, where they were at the end of last season, when the answer was, I haven't got a clue.
And as you're reeling all those elements off in terms of the attacking mix, I think there's a big one we need to add to that as well, and that is the fullbacks. Giannoulis and Stacey are making this team tick going forward now. Dimi Giannoulis, while one would still have reservations defensively, I think he's been excellent this season so far. So he seems to have added a physicality and an aggressiveness to his defending and to his front foot attacking play as well. And we saw it again today. Very unlucky not to score. There was that move that he sparked in the second half, shoveled it onto Josh Sargent at the perfect time. He's veered round two. Shots come back off the keeper. Who's there? Dimi Giannoulis. And it was only a last-ditch deflection that over the bar that foiled him from opening his account for the season. Stacey, again, he was obviously critical to the third goal today. You know, that overlapping run, Zara, little touch from Fashnak, who I agree was excellent again today in an understated way, but intelligent player, knows where to be on the pitch, can pick up the right pockets of space, and he looks like a good addition as well. But a Stacey cross, and then it leads to Barnes' goal. So, you know, I think they are the keys actually to how you have that interchangeability, where you might look at it and think, well, Sargent and Barnes a little bit one-dimensional, two big, powerful forwards. Do you need to play a certain type of way? Does the service need to be of a certain type to get the best out of them? Zara, where does he fit into that mix? Because he's such an intelligent footballer, such a technically gifted footballer. The goals, the assists that he could produce in this team, licking your lips territory. But I think what's bringing that, it's almost like the ingredients and what makes it such an appetising mix at the minute is that you've got two wide players offering that width and that ability to stretch the play and inject the speed on transition and turnovers, which less so today, but certainly a Southampton type of game where you're playing a really seriously good team in possession in this league, probably one who's going to be up there with you in the conversation for promotion, that they can flick that switch. And we saw it, you know, it was Stacey for the first goal at Southampton, wasn't it? Which, if you look at that move, it was Barnes with his back to goal, brilliant touch, and then a lay off as well. Again, to highlight Sam's point about his technical ability, he does have that in his locker. But also then it was Zara's tremendous goal on the South Coast. But where did that come from? It came from a very aggressive attacking burst from Dimi Yanulis, and that's just the two off the top of my head. I'm sure you could go right back to the start of the season, even earlier in terms of pre-season, and you can see the impact that Stacey on one side and Yanulis on the other are bringing to a David Wagner template. And if you go back to that team he built at Huddersfield, it was wide areas. That's where they were very strong that season. They came out of the Championship and then stayed in the Premier League the following season. Wide areas, width, pace, and you could entirely understand why he's gone back to basics almost in terms of what he's trying to do with this Norwich collective, because he got success doing it with that way at Huddersfield. And as I say, for me, in terms of that variety in the attacking areas, I think that variety basically is underpinned by two wide, aggressively attack-minded fullbacks who are really lifting what might be quite a functional, stodgy kind of painting by numbers style way of how they progress the ball to the opposition penalty area and how they're trying to score goals. With those two and their natural inclinations to get forward and get on the front foot, it's just lifting the whole attacking template for me.
Yeah, and it's pushing Rowe and Fashnak into more central positions as well, where they can go and join the hunt for goals, which has been good. That probably wraps up part one. We'll come back for part two, and then we'll talk a bit more maybe about the not concerns. That's probably a bit strong, but to quote David Wagner, the hairs in the soup, so to speak. Part two of the pod, we've dipped into the subs bench. Our own Adam Harvey has replaced Paddy Davitt, who's owing to print deadlines and various stuff that I won't go into, has gone to finish a few things off. So unlike Norwich City, we're hoping this won't have a negative impact on performance levels. I'm sure it won't, Adam. I'm sure you'll do a grand job. But that's a nice segue into a conversation about maybe what we've seen. And like we say, it's a really small sample size to be picking any kind of trends out of positive or negative. But I felt there was, particularly the last 15 minutes, I wouldn't say it was like particularly poor, but there was definitely a dip. And I think we saw a dip as well against Hull in the periods where Norwich started to change elements of their starting 11, and maybe it was overshadowed a bit by obviously the euphoria of Adam Eadie's late win. I think we saw it at Southampton as well, where they got far too deep, far too quick, and actually that almost cost them the game pretty late on. But also before that, before Fashnak's goal, it nearly cost them as well. Didn't, crucially, but nearly did. And it's a theme across 3 matches now that when they have dipped into their reserves and into their subs bench, there has maybe been a noticeable decline of their quality, which for the reasons that we've said, Wagner's system is very specific. It requires very specific players. Some players coming in as well haven't necessarily had the minutes that they would have needed over pre-season compared to the ones who are playing at the moment. It's very hard for any player to be dropped into a game and impact it. There's loads of reasons as to why, but it is a thing that we're witnessing. So, Sam, I mean, if you were to look at maybe I said earlier, impressive but imperfect, if you were to look at one of the imperfections, does it raise a bigger question about the squad depth from here? It's a 46-game season. We all know that what the Championship is like, the bumps in the road. You're going to get injuries at some points. Your squad is going to be affected. Is it, again, I feel bad using the word concern because that feels like a massive negative, but is it, maybe a worry is better, is it a worry that we're seeing these dips in performances when Norwich are altering what has been a pretty settled 11 over the first 3 games?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit, and we probably do have to add the caveats that Norwich were 3-0 up and pretty much home and hosed. Millwall hadn't shown any signs of a comeback at all. Even when that goal went in, I don't think there was anybody especially concerned or worried about whether Millwall would come back into the game. But we do have to look at the fact that Tony Springett was the first man off the subs bench, and as much of a talent he looks like he could be in future, he did spend last season, or the second half of last season, in and out of the team at League One Derby, and this is a team that's trying to compete for Championship promotion. So I think there is definitely some concern, and the fact that, I know we've seen it as a positive that Wagner and Norwich have been able to identify their best 11 so early on, and that was definitely a concern last season. I still don't think Dean Smith could tell you what his best Norwich City team was at any point, but maybe the fact that it's so quickly become clear what the best 11 is a little bit of a concern, and we probably do have to add another caveat that Science is going to be back soon. Sorensen as well, I would expect to at least compete for a midfield place. If McLean or Sarah end up being injured, Marcelino Nunez is clearly a very talented player who Norwich probably still have some work to do to unlock the best from. So there are players that you feel could come in and impact things at Championship level, but the way that the first team and the first choice players are performing at the moment does feel quite significantly different to what the backup players have done so far. You look at that first half against QPR and it was pretty dull, and it wasn't just a poor performance. The style of play looked completely different. It didn't look like the same team that could just play through the press and could excite fans like what we've seen in the Championship so far this season. So for me, it definitely is a concern, and it probably does expose some weaknesses when you look at rebuilding a team. As much as it's impressive, and I spoke about how good it is that Wagner's managed to completely revamp the squad with 6 signings, it probably does show when most of them are starting and you haven't really done much to the bench. I think the number of youth players on the bench as well, and not just youth players that have shown signs that they can step into a first team environment, but more players that have done okay for the under-21s and are being given a chance to experience a matchday squad. You don't want too many of those players on the bench, and there have been quite a few already so far this season. So hopefully some of those fringe players can step up. We know Przemysław Płacheta is somebody who Wagner sees a big future for and has talked about the ability of him to play in that system. So there are some players that I think could step up a level and could compete for places in the first 11, but just from the evidence we've seen so far, it has to be a concern. It was a concern for me beforehand, and today I think it's more tangibly shown that there is that big gap. But Wagner's shown that he's a good coach, and hopefully he can improve some of these players and they can get slightly closer to that 11. But yeah, right now it is a worry. Worry is probably a good word to use, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the counter for that, Adam, is as Sam says, they've got Borja Sainz to drop into this. Onel Hernandez was obviously missing today with what looks like a nasty hand injury. Jakob Sorensen, Grant Hanley, who'd be in and around it. So you begin to maybe look at dropping those players into even the matchday squad, and it starts to look significantly better. So where are you on the squad depth point and this maybe dip in performance that we're seeing late on within games?
Yeah, I'm more intrigued at kind of the nature of the substitutions he's bringing in. They're not sort of like for like substitutions at certain points. I mean, today he took I think Yanulis got pushed forward to sort of almost a winger position at one point, which is intriguing because that's, if you saw that as a starting 11, you'd sort of have big alarm bells that's a starting 11. So I'm intrigued that that's the way he's sort of playing it, but as we've already alluded to there, and as Sam spoke about, that the depth of players that are still to sort of be dropped into this team. There's going to be players that are currently on the bench that won't be in a matchday squad, and they're all very good players at this level. I mean, some of those players on the bench today definitely make half the teams in the Championship starting 11. So I don't necessarily, think there's a lack of depth. I just think maybe the nature of the substitutions at times are more intriguing than anything. But like today, I think at 3-0, Norwich are cruising a little bit, and there is that tendency that you could switch off, and those sort of little moments where maybe players are being thrown in off the bench and they're not fully sort of up to speed with the game. And I think because the game's maybe changed from what it was in the first half, where Norwich were relentless, lots of the ball. The second half, Millwall have obviously got it in them to try and push them, try and get themselves back in the game, even though it all looked done. But I don't necessarily think it's squad depth. I just think the substitutions, the nature of them, that maybe intrigues me a little bit more, and why David Wagner's going down that route.
Yeah, and as I said, that system is so specific that you drop the player into the wrong one, and it kind of it doesn't break the whole thing, but it makes the whole thing maybe a lot more ineffective than perhaps it was if you have the right players in the right slots. And equally, we know Norwich can't carry 20 players all designed for one system, because financially that wouldn't make sense. So it is something that they're going to have to manage, and we will obviously see how it develops as the season unfolds. But it's something that's worth highlighting, I think, at this early juncture, as is the form of John Rowe. Sam, 4 goals in 4 games. Quite remarkable, really. But again, similarly to Norwich, we talk about maybe the output and the results that we're seeing at the moment. He's very similar, scoring goals, but actually it's his all-round game that's really impressing as well. He's a young lad who really seems desperate to take the opportunity that he's been given.
Yeah, and it's very exciting to see. It's almost like, now I don't know what we'd do if we went to a Norwich game and there wasn't a Jonathan Rowe goal. I don't think he's played a game since he made his professional debut without or first professional start without scoring. So it is really exciting to see a player like this emerging, and not only is it good in the short term for Norwich in terms of finding these results and finding goals at important times in games. We have to remember, and I'm sure people don't want to contemplate the idea of selling Rowe already, but this is a financial system that requires these sorts of players to come through and become saleable assets. And every time you worry that Norwich might have dried up, there seems to be another couple of players come through. And if he does continue this form, or at least some sort of version of this form, I don't think he's quite at the sort of Erling Haaland level yet and can be relied upon to score every game for the rest of the season. But if he can continue to be a key player for Norwich throughout the season, and they continue to impress as much as they have, then no doubt at some stage he's going to be that next one that's linked with the Liverpools and the Man Cities, maybe even the Bayern Munichs and Barcelonas, and could earn the club 20-25 million if he continues to perform in this fashion. But right now it is just very exciting and a little bit of a relief for Norwich, to be honest, because they needed somebody to come through. And I think I spoke about it a little bit last week, but you were looking at it this season and there were a lot of players that you felt had the potential to come through. Science is obviously an exciting one, Fastnax, Rowe, even Jolis and Rashica when they were still at the club, and they all had shown talent but were all unknown quantities. And you were looking at these players and just thinking that somebody has to step up and somebody has to take that mantle on after obviously Pukki and Dowell left, and a lot of goal contributions went out the door this summer. So Norwich really needed somebody to fill that gap, and for him to step up is a massive relief, I think, and David Wagner will feel quite thankful to Rowe, I think, privately, that he's done that for him, because there were a lot of times last season under Smith and Wagner when Norwich looked very sterile, and he completely changes that. He's very dynamic, very exciting, and it's so encouraging to see him producing that end product, because I did have fears at the start of the season, and I spoke about this after that whole game when he really burst onto the scene, that he was just that exciting young player that comes on for the last 10 minutes, has a run at defenders, and that's what's exciting for fans. But that's not what he's done. He's produced at the end of those runs now, and he's put the ball in the net 4 times in 4 games. He's even improved his heading ability. So it is really exciting to see him come through. I'm excited to see what he can achieve. But for now, I think Wagner would probably be keen for us to say, let's not talk him up too much or big him up too much. Let's think back to maybe the early years of Todd Cantwell and how he performed in a Norwich shirt in the Premier League, and it doesn't always work out long term. So still plenty of work for him to do. He's only 20 years old, and I'm sure his own ambitions aren't just to perform in the Championship. So if he wants to get to the levels that he can and that he probably wants to, still plenty of work to be done. But it looks like he's under the right head coach, he's in the right system, and right now he's got the confidence to do it. So long may it continue.
Yeah, and it's only a good run of form at the moment, even though he's a young player, very bright future, and someone who's very highly thought of and has been very highly thought of for a long period of time. This is the sample size is so small. It's going to be interesting, and I was thinking as you were speaking there how interesting it would have been if Borja Sainz would have remained fit. Maybe Jonathan Rowe is still sat here without a first start. So it's funny how football works, and it can work negatively as well in that same sense as quickly. So particularly with young players. So I think there does need to be a degree of pragmatism maybe around what we're seeing at the moment, but I just really like the purity of seeing this 20-year-old winger. Just feels like he's expressing himself, and he's being himself pretty unapologetically at the moment and playing with real personality, and I think in a system that is pretty much geared to knock that out of every single professional footballer that comes through the system. It's really nice to see, and I think that's why fans have taken to him as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he does under different conditions when there are wing competition and we go deeper into the Championship season and teams start to do what Millwall have started to do to him, which is leave a mark on him pretty early and try and nullify him and use the dark arts of the game to do so. So really interesting, but it's hard not to be full of praise for John Rowe, but he needs to prove that this is something more substantial than just a good run of form, which I think off the early evidence he certainly has the quality to do. It's about consistency now. And then the one player I wanted to come to you on, Adam, purely because it feels like we haven't really spoken about him, I don't think. We might have done after the whole one. Gabriel Sara, it's just ridiculously good, isn't he? Turn out, if you're a Premier League scout, he's rubbish, and hopefully they're all gone. But the fact that you've got someone there, I mean, is it too soon to say he is indispensable to Norwich City at this point? We've obviously got a situation where there's a transfer window still open. We know how fans' minds work. It'll be, what if? I think Stuart Webber spoke earlier in the summer that there was big interest in Gabriel Sara. Hard to quantify exactly what that means when you're not involved in that situation. So it's not just paranoia for the sake of paranoia. There's been told that there have been clubs monitoring, and quite frankly, of course, there would be. But this possibility of him leaving before the end of the window, I personally don't think he will. But we know how things change in football. And Norwich City now at a stage where their prospects this season and what they hope to achieve mean that he has to remain at the football club. Has he become indispensable for David Wagner in Norwich City? Yeah,
I think he's probably the one player on the team sheet who every single week he's fit. He's the first player that David Wagner will be putting on his team board, tactic board up at Colney, and he's so crucial. I mean, I was speaking to one of my friends the other day, and I said he's almost like Madison Buendia, where you looked at them and you thought, he's going right to the top, almost on a different level to maybe the Cantwells or the Jamal Lewises or, of the world, which you thought very good players, probably better than Norwich City at the time. But I think Sara, I'd be very shocked if he's not playing, at the top of the Premier League at some point in his career, still relatively young. And I think if you're Stuart Webber and you're Norwich City and you can afford to keep hold of him, which, all the signals would suggest they can, and I think he's happy in Norwich. He's, of course, only been here now 1 year. He's very settled, got his dogs over. So I think that's all playing in, and I think if you're in the Norwich City hierarchy, you're not going to lose value on Gabriel Sara this season. I think you're actually going to gain value if at the end of the season Norwich City, are promoted and he becomes a Premier League footballer, or even if they don't, and he's got, double figures in goals and assist contributions. He's going to be worth probably even more than what they'd get for him now. I think now there's probably sort of a hype around him in the early start to the season, and maybe clubs would get desperate late in the transfer window and look at him and think, he's a real talent, he could be useful for us. But I think in the long term for Norwich and what their aspirations and hopes are this season, it's crucial they keep hold of him. I mean, what he can do with a football is quite extraordinary. I mean, one of the passes he picked out today for Fashnak, I just sat there and thought, that is, almost hard to judge it, but that's kind of the Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard-esque kind of passes where you think what a sensational pass that was, and he's got it in the locker, and it's consistent, which I think that's probably the one thing. You maybe look at someone like Marcelino Nunez, unbelievable footballer and is a really good player in there. But the one problem he's got is he's not very consistent. He'll have one really, really good game and then he'll almost go missing for another game, where I really can't remember a game where Gabriel Sara's been poor. Well, even really probably since sort of when he first came to the club, and that was under Dean Smith, and there was all the sort of permutations, I suppose, around the fact, he didn't have his dogs. He was still trying to settle into Norwich City. So I think you can almost, let him have that. But yeah, if Norwich are going to get to the Premier League, he's the one man they've got to keep hold of, because without him, you look at the other options that they have. I think Liam Gibbs is a great player, but he's still very raw, still a young man. Jakob Sorensen, of course, injury issues, and he's not the same mould or type of player as Gabriel Sara. And obviously, I've already spoke about Marcelino Nunez and maybe just trying to get that consistency in his game. I think if you lose Sara, I think you can probably give up on any hopes of certainly top 2, but I think even top 6, you'd be looking at that and thinking maybe not. Almost what Coventry have with Gustavo Ahama. I think he's such a crucial cog, and he was the reason why they made the top 6 last year, because he was so consistent, such a talent, and obviously, of course, he's now made the Premier League move. So I think Gabriel Sara will be the next one in the sort of, I suppose, conveyor belt that would be a Premier League player if Norwich don't go up.
Can I just say, I think that is a great point about the fact that he'll grow in value. I think when we see it from a Norwich perspective, we almost see, if somebody put 20 million on the table now, we see it as like, oh, Norwich couldn't turn that down. But I think Adam makes a great point in that it's close to a guarantee that he adds 5 million to his value this season. So it's not a situation where, maybe as it was with Cantwell at times with his contractual situation, or with other players that they actually thought they were getting pretty good deals with. I don't think it's going to be a situation where this summer they get an offer they can't refuse, because I think they'll know that even if it comes to a year and they haven't been promoted and they have to let go of him, that they will at least retain that value and almost definitely increase it. So I think that's probably in Norwich's favour, and probably hopefully eases fans' worries with 12 days left of I think it's 12 days, is it? 2nd of September? 12 days left of the transfer window. Hopefully I think that's a reason to be optimistic that he'll be in the building at the end of that.
I think the biggest compliment to him is Norwich have played 3 championship games, and he's been the player with the highest amount of, not necessarily the best player on the day, but the player with the highest quality of any team that Norwich have played so far. He's been pretty good. I'm selling him short by saying pretty good, but we'll let other people eulogise about him. Some footballer, and as you say, only going to get better as the season goes. Not even fully fit yet, which is quite remarkable. And that maybe lends into a debate about the transfer window, Adam, because there probably comes a point, as Sam said, there's not long left now. There obviously still be some situations that Norwich are aware of and monitoring, mostly from an outgoing perspective, probably mostly around Andrew Omobamidele, who again didn't start, and it's interesting that David Wagner seems to be preferring the right foot, left foot combo of Ben Gibson and Shane Duffy, and he explained a little bit as to why on Friday and how that helps their build up and whatnot. So by that measure, he's putting Shane Duffy ahead of Andrew Omobamidele as a right-sided centre back. He came on this afternoon, and again still looks a bit rusty to me. So that's interesting. But there must come a point, the likes of Gabriel Sara, Josh Sargent, who I know has been linked with Leeds. Norwich won't be selling him to Leeds, so you can knock that one on the head, unless they put like 50 million on the table or something, of course, but they're not going to. There must come a point where Norwich City look at this sort of thing, and I don't think there has been an offer for Sara or Sargent or whatever, but there would come a point where it would be too late, wouldn't it, for them to do something. Omobamidele's situation is quite different, because we know they've done a lot of work in advance and have a list of targets ready to go for that moment. So if that arrived at 8 o'clock on deadline day, they would be in a position to act. It's not the case with some players. So there must come a point, if you're Stuart Webber and you're seeing the phone ring and it's certain clubs and they say we're interested in X, that you just think that we can't do it now because it's too late.
Yeah, if you look at Stuart Webber's track record, across Huddersfield and Norwich, he's never really done business late in a window. It's always very much, this is what we're going to do. These are the kind of players that are going to go out the door. Of course, he made it very sort of out there in the public eye that, they would sell Max Aarons this summer, and they would be happy to entertain offers for Andrew Omobamidele. But yeah, you've also spoke about the interest that there will be in Gabriel Sara. Norwich will be aware of that. Every football club across the world and Europe will know who Gabriel Sara is at the moment. Has probably got him on their transfer, targets list somewhere. But yeah, I think if it comes sort of deadline day and and there does become an offer for Gabriel Sauer, unless it's like, stupid money that's like off the Richter that Norwich could not turn down, there's no way that they sell him. And I think obviously with the situation with Andrew is completely different, because Norwich have those 3 or 4 targets where they go, right, if we're happy to accept that £20 million offer from X, and we've got these players ready in line, bang, there's the deal, and we'll get it done. So they're not naive. They know the situation. They know how it's going to play out, and I'm still fairly confident. I think David Wagner knows this is his squad, and he's very happy with it. He spoke about that at numerous press conferences and post-match after games just recently, about how happy he is with the squad, and if this is the squad he's got come the 2nd of September, then he's a happy man going at least as far as January. So I don't see anyone in the club then sort of downplaying that and selling one of his best assets that maybe gives him the best opportunity to get the club back to the promised land. And of course, hopefully with sort of a new energy of a new sporting director, the direction could eventually lead Norwich to a team that could compete in the Premier League for the long term. So but just to answer your question, no, I think unless there's £50 million offers for Gabriel Sauer and Josh Sargent, they will be Norwich City players come September.
Yep, I concur. Tim Krul left this week, of course, going to Luton, which we've written a lot about and spoken a lot about. I think we mentioned it on last week's podcast and spoke a bit about Tim, but that was all confirmed. George Long came in. You'll know all of that now, which is interesting, and we'll obviously see how that develops. It's interesting that they've kind of changed and shifted some cogs in the goalkeeping department, and I'm sure that will be explained as to why that is exactly taken place as well. David Wagner spoke a bit about Tim Krul. Angus Gunn is the number one. There's a Premier League opportunity made perfect sense, I think, for all parties, which is good. And now we have a trip of 3 away games on the spin, starting next week at Huddersfield, then that lovely Carabao Cup trip to Bristol City in midweek, and then Rotherham, then an international break. You've booked a holiday, so is this clever planning, or is it just coincidence? You're going to try and claim it's coincidence.
Genuinely, I can confirm. I could probably go and find the dates on my laptop now. I think I booked this back in about April, pre the fixtures coming out, and that week
we've got no way of verifying it.
When I saw the fixtures come out, I saw I'll miss Rotherham away. A little bit gutted, because I actually really enjoyed Rotherham. It's probably one of my favourite away games in the Championship, so I felt that was a little bit of a blow. And it was only when the cup draw was on the other week that I clocked that Norwich have a midweek game that week, and I miss a game there, thinking I'd probably just get like a home tie against, I don't know if Stephen is just still in it, but someone of that ilk. And I thought not the biggest issue in the world, and then see Bristol City away be pulled out. And I was with Sam at the Norwich ladies game against Wroxham, and the cup draw was taking place, and I had the slight sort of, I suppose, enjoyment of telling him that it was Bristol City away, to which he looked at me with a face and just sulked to the floor almost, knowing that I wouldn't have to go. The only downside is that we've got I don't want to put this out too publicly, but a very nice sort of gaff in that area, a hotel that's very nice, and that's where we stayed before the Bristol City game last year. So I will miss out on that, but I'm sure when I'm in Bratislava in Slovakia with a beer in my hand, I won't really be too gutted that you boys are heading down south to Bristol City.
It's a seeded draw. It's remarkable, isn't it, that you can end up with Bristol City, but there we go. It'll be good fun, I'm sure, and you will be missed. Norwich City's women, Sam, they recorded their first win of the season as well against Sudbury, so it's been a good day for both Norwich City sides. I think it was a late winner from Freya Simons, although I haven't seen too much of the twos and fro's of that, because we've been kind of wrapped up in post-match stuff, but good start for them, isn't it?
Great start for them, and looks like they're really going for it this year. We spoke to Martin Herdman, the new coach, after that Wroxham game that Adam referenced, and he spoke really, really well, seems really enthusiastic, and looks like he has a lot of ideas and a real depth of philosophy to bring to that team. They've obviously brought in 7 new signings, so it's definitely something to keep an eye on. They're at Carrow Road.
September the 10th.
Yeah, that's what I had in my head. So, I would encourage people to go to that. I think they've sold more than 2,000 tickets now, so if they could get that up a little bit as well, that would be good. But yeah, it looks like a very exciting season for them. Finished 4th last season. I believe you have to win the league to go up, so there's still a bit of a gap for them to bridge. But #United, who are, as I'm sure people would expect, sort of taking those lower leagues by storm, have now gone up. So a few things in their favour. Hopefully they'll be able to bridge that gap, and they may even push for promotion this season. So hopefully a double promotion to speak of for Norwich City by the end of the season. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how they get on, and obviously we'll have coverage of that across our channels this season as well. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yep, Norwich also released the third kit, which I'm going to use the word funky to describe. It's very good. It's lots of people have said it looks a bit like a red cabbage, which is quite an apt description. I actually think it's my favourite of the three they've released. Controversially, I would go third, home, away, I think, if anyone disputes
I agree with
that.
that.
Yeah?
I'd put away above home. I think that's...
Would you?
Yeah.
You're wearing a hoop top, look.
Yeah, I think... when I saw that third kit get dropped, that was giving me like proper festival vibes. I thought that's definitely going to be a classic in about 20 years' time. Everyone's going to want the Norwich City 23-24 third kit.
We'll have another cardboard cutout.
We will. I think when the away shirt dropped, that was like, apart from the collar, that's the one downside of that shirt, which I've spoke about previously in a podcast. But the home one has grown on me. But I think still compared to last year, it's just not on the same level. So for that reason, I'd still go away over the home shirt.
Yeah, and sadly the Lionesses were beaten in the Women's World Cup final this afternoon, 1-0 defeat to Spain, which is obviously a real shame, but a wonderful tournament that they've had. Lauren Hemp in particular, I think it's 4 goal contributions in 7 games for her. She's obviously done Norfolk proud, they've done the country proud. I think there's a real uplift in the number of people watching women's football. It was kind of a pretty remarkable moment to see people kind of gathered around TVs pre-kickoff at Carrow Road trying to watch that game. So that was excellent. But nonetheless, defeat for the Lionesses, defeat for the Lions. Not a good day to be a member of the Pride. Thank you very much for listening, watching the latest edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. We'll be back next week. Until then, we'll see you again very soon.